Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The silence in Dr. Aldridge's office was thick and oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. My eyes were drawn to it, as if each tick were marking down the seconds of my life. I sat in the leather chair across from him, feeling oddly detached, like I was observing someone else's life unravel before me. "Nathaniel," Dr. Aldridge began, his voice gentle but firm, the way one speaks to someone about to face the unthinkable. "The scans confirmed what we suspected. The cancer is aggressive and has spread to multiple organs. I'm afraid you have only a few months left." The words hit me like a hammer, but I didn't flinch. I had felt it coming. The constant fatigue, the weight loss I couldn't explain, and the pain that gnawed at me, especially in the dead of night. Yet hearing the diagnosis spoken aloud made it real in a way I hadn't fully prepared for. "How long exactly?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. 3, maybe 4 months at best. We can try a combination of treatments, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, possibly surgery, but it will only buy you time, not a cure." He leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the desk. "You should consider your next steps carefully. Have you thought about your estate, your legacy?" The word legacy hung in the air. Legacy. A millionaire with no heirs. I'd built my wealth, amassed properties, businesses, and investments, but for what? I had no children, no wife, no close family to leave anything to. Just a line of people circling me like vultures, waiting for me to drop so they could pick at the carcass of my fortune. "Treatment," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "And what's the point? A few more months of agony for what?" I sighed, rubbing my temple. "You know I have no family, no children. I'd just be delaying the inevitable." Dr. Aldridge nodded, but his expression was tinged with sadness. "I understand, Nathaniel. But you still have time to decide how you want to spend your remaining months. It doesn't have to be about treatment. It can be about doing something meaningful with the time you have." Something meaningful. The words resonated with me. But what could I do that would matter in the short time left? I had always been driven by success, by the need to prove something, but now it seemed hollow. I needed to do more than just leave behind a pile of wealth. I straightened in my chair, an idea forming slowly, gaining momentum. What if I didn't spend my last days locked in a hospital room fighting the losing battle? What if I found someone who truly deserved my fortune? Not some blood relative, not a business partner, but someone with a good heart, someone who would use it for more than just personal gain. "I think I know what I need to do," I said, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. Dr. Aldridge looked at me, puzzled. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward slightly. "I don't want to waste my time on treatments. I want to find someone worthy to inherit what I've built. Someone with real integrity, compassion. Not for the money, but for what they can do with it." "You mean giving your wealth to charity?" "Not charity," I replied, shaking my head. "A person. Someone I can find, someone deserving." Dr. Aldridge's brow furrowed in confusion. "And how do you plan to do that, Nathaniel?" "You can't just." "I'll figure it out." I cut him off, standing up with a sudden surge of energy. "Thank you, doctor, but I won't need any more appointments. I have my answer." As I walked out of the office, my heart pounded with a new sense of purpose. I didn't know where to start, but I knew one thing. My last months would not be spent waiting to die. They would be spent searching for someone who truly deserved a legacy. The morning sun barely crept over the horizon as I stood in front of the cracked mirror in my bathroom, assessing the stranger staring back at me. My reflection was unrecognizable. The tailored suits, the crisp shirts, the polished shoes, all gone. Instead, I wore an old tattered coat I'd picked up from a thrift store. My once clean-shaven face was now covered in scruff, and my normally slicked back hair fell messily around my forehead. I ran my fingers over the rough material of the coat and muttered to myself, "You look like hell, Nathaniel." just what you were going for. The plan had been simple enough. Disappear into the world, strip away the wealth, the reputation, the privilege, become invisible. It was the only way I could truly see people for who they were. I needed to know what they did when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain. Only then could I find someone worthy of inheriting everything I had built. As I finished tying the worn-out laces on my scuffed shoes, the doorbell rang. It was Daniel, my assistant for the last decade, the only person I trusted with this insane idea. When I opened the door, Daniel's expression shifted from shock to dismay. "Sir, are you sure about this? You look, well." "I look perfect," I said, pulling the hood of the coat over my head. "Exactly how I need to look." "But what if something happens to you?" Daniel asked, his voice tinged with concern. "You're going to be out there, alone. No security, no connections." "That's the point, Daniel," I replied firmly. "I need to see the world from the bottom, not the top. If I'm surrounded by bodyguards and handlers, I'll never get the truth. No one will show their real face if they know who I am." He sighed, clearly unconvinced. "And what if you don't find anyone? What if this whole thing is a mistake?" I looked him in the eye, my voice softening. "Then I'll die knowing I tried. I can't leave this world without giving this a chance." Daniel hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right, sir, but please be careful." With that, I left my penthouse for the last time, my heart racing as I stepped onto the street. The cool morning air bit at my skin, and the city, usually so familiar, felt strange and foreign. No one glanced my way as I shuffled through the crowds. No respectful nods, no whispers of recognition. I was invisible, just like I wanted. I walked aimlessly, taking in the sounds of the bustling city from a new perspective. People hurried past me, talking on phones, sipping coffee, completely absorbed in their own lives. For the first time, I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong in this world of fast cars and towering buildings. And strangely, it felt liberating. As I reached the corner of a busy street, I spotted a small diner. Its windows were fogged from the heat inside, and a few patrons sat hunched over plates of food. I pushed open the door and stepped in, the smell of greasy bacon and coffee hitting me instantly. I took a seat in the corner, unnoticed, and observed. A waitress, a young woman with tired eyes and a frayed apron, approached my table. She glanced at me briefly before scribbling on her notepad. "What'll it be?" she asked without much enthusiasm. "Just a coffee, please," I replied, trying to keep my voice low. She nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. As I waited, I couldn't help but wonder how many people like her went unnoticed every day. Hardworking, barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck. Would someone like her be the one I was looking for? Or would it be someone completely unexpected? The coffee arrived, steaming and dark, and I sipped it slowly, savoring the bitter taste. This was only the beginning. The evening air grew colder as I wandered down a narrow alleyway. My hands, stiff from the biting wind, were tucked deep into the pockets of my tattered coat. The streets were quieter now, a far cry from the usual bustling energy I had come to know in this part of the city. I found myself in a part of town that I normally wouldn't dare to visit as my old self. I passed an old brick building when a sudden sound, like hurried footsteps, caught my attention. Before I could react, a sharp force hit my back, sending me crashing to the ground. Pain shot through my shoulder as I rolled onto the wet pavement. "Get his wallet," a voice shouted from behind me, filled with aggression and excitement. Two shadows loomed over me as I lay there, struggling to regain my bearings. "Please, just take what you want," I said, my voice rasping. But they weren't here for negotiation. One of the attackers, a tall, thin boy who couldn't have been older than 18, rifled through my pockets, while the other kept a foot pressed firmly on my chest. "You think you can just walk around here like this?" one sneered. "People like you don't belong here." I winced, feeling a dull throbbing in my ribs. My mind raced. Had I made a terrible mistake? In my desire to become invisible, I had become vulnerable, truly at the mercy of these kids. They wouldn't care about who I was, or the wealth I had hidden away. Leave him alone. A voice suddenly pierced the dark alley, small but strong. I turned my head just enough to catch a glimpse of a figure rushing towards us. A boy, no older than 9 or 10, fearlessly running toward the scene. The attackers paused, momentarily taken aback by the boy's unexpected arrival. "Beat it, kid," the taller one mourned, though his voice wavered. But the boy didn't leave. Instead, he darted forward, grabbing a loose brick from the ground. I said, "Leave him alone." He shouted, gripping the brick tightly in his small hands, eyes wide with determination. The thugs, clearly unprepared for this, exchanged glances before deciding it wasn't worth the trouble. They shoved me one last time and fled, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. I coughed, slowly pushing myself up, when the boy rushed over to my side. "Are you okay, Daddy?" he asked, his voice trembling with concern. I froze. "Daddy?" I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. His dark eyes looked so familiar, filled with a mix of worry and innocence that tugged at something deep inside me. What did you call me?" I stammered, still disoriented from the attack. "Daddy," the boy repeated, more softly this time. He knelt beside me, his small hands resting on my arm. "You're hurt. We have to get you to Mom. She'll know what to do." I blinked, unable to comprehend what was happening. This boy, this stranger, was looking at me with an affection I hadn't seen in years. But how could he think I was his father? I who had no children, who had never believed it was even possible. I don't understand," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Who are you?" The boy furrowed his brow. "I'm Callum. Don't you remember me, Daddy?" My heart pounded in my chest, the confusion and disbelief overwhelming. Could this be possible? The walk back to Callum's home was filled with silence, except for the occasional sound of his small footsteps pattering beside me. My mind swirled with confusion. I had never fathered a child. How could this boy call me Daddy so earnestly? Yet there was something familiar in his eyes, a resemblance I couldn't quite shake. We reached a modest apartment block, tucked away on a quieter street. The building's faded exterior was in stark contrast to the world I had come from, and yet it was comforting in its simplicity. Callum led me inside, his tiny hand gripping mine with surprising strength, as though he were afraid I might disappear if he let go. As we approached the door to one of the apartments, Callum knocked excitedly. "Mom, open up," he called. Moments later, the door swung open, and there she stood, Holly. Time seemed to stop. I hadn't seen Holly in years, and yet there she was, standing in front of me with the same familiar face I had once loved. Her expression shifted from shock to something deeper, a mixture of guilt and pain. Her eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant, I knew something had changed forever. "Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." I couldn't find the words. My chest tightened, and my thoughts raced faster than I could process. "Holly, what is going on?" "Callum. He called me Daddy." "I don't understand." She sighed deeply, stepping aside to let us in. I hesitated for a moment but followed, glancing at Callum, who seemed completely at ease, as though this was just another ordinary day. Once inside, Holly motioned for me to sit down at a small, worn-out kitchen table. "Nathaniel, there's something you need to know," she began, her voice trembling slightly. She avoided my gaze, busying herself with straightening a dish towel that hung on the back of a chair. I sat there, waiting, my heart pounding in anticipation. "What is it, Holly? Tell me the truth." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Callum is your son, Nathaniel." The world seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my throat, and I stared at her in disbelief. "That's impossible," I managed to say, shaking my head. "You know I I was told I could never. I know, she interrupted softly, taking a seat across from me. That's what we both believed. But after I left, after we went our separate ways, I found out I was pregnant. I tried to reach you, Nathaniel, but you had disappeared. I thought you didn't want anything to do with me or the baby, so I never tried again. I ran my hands through my hair, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A son. I had a son. Why didn't you try harder to find me? My voice was laced with a mixture of hurt and confusion. Holly's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know where to start, Nathaniel. And I was scared. Scared that you wouldn't want this, that you wouldn't want him. I looked over at Callum, who had been quietly playing with a toy car on the floor, blissfully unaware of the turmoil swirling between his parents. My heart ached with a strange combination of joy and sorrow. I had missed so much. The tension between Holly and me had barely settled when the sound of something crashing to the floor startled us both. I looked over just in time to see Callum sway on his feet, his face pale, eyes fluttering. "Callum!" Holly screamed, rushing to his side. My body moved on instinct, following her, but I was frozen with fear, watching as she gently cradled him in her arms. His breathing was shallow, his lips turning an unsettling shade of blue. "Call an ambulance," Holly cried, her voice trembling with panic as she desperately tried to wake him. "Please, Nathaniel, now." I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. Every second felt like an eternity. I dialed the emergency number, my voice unrecognizable, as I explained the situation. The operator assured me help was on the way, but that didn't stop the overwhelming sense of dread from settling deep in my chest. Holly was holding Callum tightly, whispering his name over and over again, pleading with him to stay with us. I crouched down next to her, my mind racing, heart pounding. How had things spiraled so quickly? "He's got a rare genetic condition," Holly muttered through tears, not looking up at me. "We've been managing it, but lately, he's been getting worse. The doctor said a transplant might be his only chance, but finding a match." Her words trailed off, and for the first time, I understood the full gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about me and Holly anymore. This was about our son, fighting for his life. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I could have." "There wasn't time," she cut me off, her gaze finally meeting mine, filled with a desperation that mirrored my own. "I didn't know how to reach you. I didn't even know if you'd care." Before I could respond, the distant sound of sirens pierced through the air, drawing closer. The paramedics arrived in a blur of motion, their faces calm but focused as they loaded Callum onto the stretcher. Holly was a mess, clutching onto my arm as if I was the only thing keeping her grounded. At the hospital, the doctors rushed Callum into the emergency room. Holly and I were left standing in the hallway, an agonizing silence between us. I had never felt so helpless in my life. "I need to be tested," I said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "If I'm his father, there's a chance I could be a match." Holly looked at me, hope flickering in her tear-streaked eyes. "Do you really think?" "I have to try," I interrupted, already turning to find a nurse. "For him. For Callum." In that moment, all the anger, confusion, and betrayal between us seemed to melt away. There was only one thing that mattered now: saving our son. The day of the transplant arrived faster than I had expected. Callum was prepped and wheeled into the operating room, and I followed close behind, my heart pounding in my chest. The doctors had reassured me that I was a perfect match, one of the few miracles in all this chaos. But nothing could ease the weight that sat heavily in my chest. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Holly asked, her voice barely a whisper as she stood beside me in the hospital gown. Her eyes searched mine, filled with worry. I gave her a small, tired smile. "It's the only thing I can do for him now, Holly. I couldn't be there for him before, but I'll be there for him now." Holly bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes. She nodded, unable to say anything more. The doctors ushered me into the room where Callum lay, pale and small in the oversized hospital bed. I leaned down, brushing a gentle kiss on his forehead. "I'll see you soon, buddy," I whispered, my voice cracking as I fought to keep it steady. "You're going to be okay. I promise." The procedure felt like it lasted a lifetime. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the sensation of pain in my body distant, like it was happening to someone else. When I finally woke up, I was groggy and weak, but alive. Holly was there beside me, her face streaked with tears, though her smile was full of relief. "Callum?" I asked, my throat dry. "He's stable," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "The doctors said the transplant was successful. He's going to be okay, Nathaniel. You saved him." I closed my eyes, letting the wave of relief wash over me. But deep down, I knew what was coming next. There was something I hadn't told Holly, something that would shatter the fragile peace we had built. Days passed, and Callum grew stronger. His laughter filled the hospital room, a sound that made my heart swell with a mixture of pride and sadness. He was more than I had ever hoped for, kind, brave, and full of life. But I couldn't ignore the ticking clock inside of me. One afternoon, as we sat together in the hospital room, Callum playing with a toy car on his bed and Holly resting beside him, I knew I couldn't keep the truth from them any longer. "Holly," I said softly, my voice trembling. She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with concern. "There's something I need to tell you, something important." "What is it?" she asked, frowning slightly. I took a deep breath, my heart aching as I tried to find the right words. "I'm sick, terminally ill." Her face went pale, and she froze. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've only got a few months left," I continued, my voice shaking with the weight of my confession. "The doctors couldn't do anything. I'm dying, Holly." Callum looked up, his big, innocent eyes filled with confusion. "Daddy," he asked, his voice small, "are you gonna die?" I swallowed hard, tears burning in my eyes as I knelt down beside him. "Yes, Callum. I'm going to die soon. But I need you to know how much I love you, both of you. I've never had much time with you, and that's something I'll always regret." Holly was sobbing now, her hands covering her face, while Callum reached out and clutched my arm. I felt his small hand trembling, and I held it tightly. "I didn't have much of a family before," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But you too, you're my family now. And when I go, I'm leaving everything to you, my entire fortune, every cent of it. So you and Callum will be taken care of for the rest of your lives." "Nathaniel." "No." Holly's voice cracked as she tried to form words. "I don't care about the money. I know," I whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "But it's all I can give. Please, let me do this for you and for our son." The days grew shorter, the nights longer. As my body grew weaker, I knew the end was near, but I refused to die alone. On my last night, I held Holly's hand in one and Callum's in the other. They stayed by my side, their tears mixing with my own. And in those final moments, with the two people I love more than anything in the world, I felt at peace. "I love you both," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Don't ever forget that." As the darkness crept in, I closed my eyes for the last time, holding onto the hands of the only people I had ever truly cared about. And as the world slipped away, I could still feel their tears, warm and real, reminding me that I wasn't leaving them behind. I was leaving them with the greatest gift I could ever give.